Okay, our next speaker will present on the need for secular reform of the Australian Defence Force, in particular the need for reform of the military's reliance on religious-based chaplaincy as the front-line wellbeing capability for defence personnel. Collin Acton.
Thank you.
He is a former Principal Chaplain and Director-General of Navy Chaplaincy. He was instrumental in introducing new secular pastoral care roles into the Navy in 2020, doing a reverse chaplaincy. I like to hear that. Welcome, Collin.
Thank you so much, Jane. And like all the other speakers, I'm very happy to be here and be a part of this gathering. And Chris, love that. I've been thinking that all along. We have a lot of power, more than we realise, and I think we should be marshalling that to achieve ends that actually benefit everybody. I guess I'm a bit of an anomaly. I was the Director-General of Chaplaincy in Navy, but when I left that position, I guess I left that 3 years ago, and it's like taking off dirty old rags and leaving it behind. That was my Christian faith. So I am very proudly a humanist, and I'd say I'm probably more of an atheist than anything. And that really came about over about a 10-year period, and it certainly sped up in my last 3 or 4 years within the role of chaplain. And that was dealing with other religious chaplains and with a group called the Religious Advisory Committee to the Services. They did more to push me out of the Christian faith than anything. Just seeing the nastiness, the bullying, just the callousness with which these characters carried on and looked after the interests of their own flocks and their own religions at the expense of ADF personnel was absolutely appalling. And, I guess I was also the victim of lots of bullying, although, being the DG chap, you shouldn't admit to that. But certainly lots of religious chaplains took great delight in telling me that I was going to hell, that I was somehow an agent of Satan, and a whole range of other things. It was absolutely appalling. So I guess while I still have friends in ADF chaplaincy, and there's some good people, good men and women who are religious chaplains in the ADF, I've come to see that role as something that is in need of reform. Now, I felt that for a long period of time. I was lucky enough to be plucked out of general chaplaincy and go off and do a course at Western Creek. It's a strategic leaders course for 12 months. And that time away from the coalface was really important. Because it's there I realised that, the role of chaplain doesn't need to be done by a religious person. It is someone who can actually sit down with, can empathise with, and can give themselves to another human being who's going through a really difficult time. That's in essence what pastoral care is. To provide a wise soundboard, to provide a little bit of advice perhaps if needed, but really to help the individual sort out their own issues. That's what the role is all about. It's very low level, and where it becomes more complex, we simply refer on to other professionals. That's what the role's all about. Now, it became really important over the last couple of years, especially as the Royal Commission into Defence Member and Veteran Suicide cranked up. It was really obvious that we've got a problem. And that problem was further highlighted just a couple of weeks ago. So the National Institute for Health and Wellbeing released a report that says, Defence, you've still got a problem. And Nick Caldis, the chair of the Royal Commission, said in response to that report that there's so much more that needs to be done. And I think an essential part of that has got to be reforming the ADF chaplaincy model. Now, like I said, I'm a big believer in the pastoral care model, looking after our troops. We take people from all over Australia, bring them into a couple of recruit training bases. They're a long way from family and friends. It's a very intense period of time when they do their training. After that initial training, they go off and do their initial employment training. Once again, a long way away from family and their familial supports. And then we deploy them. We send them out, employ them, deploy them a long way from home. So we've got lots of young people living away from home, perhaps for the first time, and they struggle. You've also got families who come together in these sorts of circumstances, and people may have been in the defence for 9 or 10 years, but because they move around so much, they never get a chance to put down roots and develop the supports around them. So it can be quite disorientating for families and for family members. So having that safe person, and that's what I think chaplaincy is. Chaplaincy works with command, and command is your primary model for providing pastoral care to the troops, but command's also the ones that will discipline you if you get it wrong or you do something naughty, or they will also have an impact on your career and postings and courses and things like that. If you come and tell them that there's something going on in your life and they think, oh, hang on, we've got a problem here, we better refer you off to medical, and things can go downhill very quickly. Whereas a chaplain is a safety valve in the system. Works with command, but is outside of command, and can sit and hear some of those concerns without referring people off to medical or whatever, unless it's absolutely necessary. And then we certainly work within the system, or chaplains certainly work within the system. But as I said earlier, it's a role that does not need to be filled by a religious person. And Defence has a problem because it employs 150 full-time chaplains. There are another 150 part-time chaplains, and they are almost all ordained ministers of the Christian religion, clergy. Their primary qualification is a degree in theology. Their experience is at least 2 years of pastoral ministry, and that's almost exclusively in a Christian parish. And friends, I don't need to remind you, you've probably seen military people hanging around from here to there. The military is not a church. It is not a Christian community. In fact, I recall one lovely lady who went through training as a chaplain at HMAS Creswell, and she said to me afterwards, she said, I've never heard such swearing in my life. It was just awful. Now, she came out of a church, and I'm assuming no one ever said fuck or anything like that in church intentionally, but she heard lots of that kind of language, and it was quite offensive to her. So, their training and background is not really looking after the kind of people that we employ in Defence. They're ordinary Australians. They're Australians who come out of the public and private education, and often they're extraordinary people, and they do great work. But as I say, we employ them in all sorts of ways which can harm them in the end, and it's important that we provide support to them, appropriate support. Now, we've seen some developments in trying to get an appropriate pastoral care mechanism in place for ADF people, and as Shane mentioned, I was successful in bringing in a non-religious capability in Navy, and that's called a Maritime Spiritual Wellbeing Officer. And friends, I've got to say that there's a whole history of why that name is in place, and none of it has to do with looking after Defence people. It's true. That name is there because we're looking after... Sorry? Oh, sorry. Yep. So none of that is looking after the wellbeing of Defence. That Maritime Spiritual Wellbeing Officer was looking out for the interests of chaplains who are nervous about a name that didn't include something religious or spiritual. There we go. So right from the get-go, this capability stumbled into service with this crazy name, MSWO. That's what we call them for short in the Navy. Everything's got an acronym. And this capability is very small in number. We've got just a handful of them in Navy. So out of those 150 positions that I mentioned, still a largest number, 95% are Christian ministers, a very tiny sliver faith groups other than Christian. So we've got, I think, 2 Islamic chaplains and a couple of Buddhist chaplains. Navy have a Hindu chaplain in training. Nani is wonderful. She was my staff officer, and she's zoomed off to do some training, 4 years out there before coming back into Navy. She'll be fantastic because she's getting civilian qualifications in counselling and a whole range of other things which will be useful for the workforce. But by and large, as I say, chaplains are clergy. Now, when we were pushing this and saying we actually need to extend this into the Army and the Air Force, what we kept on hearing back is that people have other non-religious options. Navy have this. Navy are a special case. Poor little Navy. Look at over here. It needs all the care it can get. Therefore, we introduce these non-religious. But Army and Air Force are just fine. Thank you very much. And look, this bit of advice that chaplaincy is but part of a larger support service is peddled by senior officers in response to David Shoebridge's office, requesting information on this. They're saying, oh, but chaplain, there might be a lot of chaplains, but there's all these other people as well. And I've got to say, folks, that is a frickin' lie. It's a half-truth, because there is nothing out there that even comes close to the capability of a chaplain. You see, those other services they're talking about are medical, psychological and social work. And all of those services are very different, with the exception of Army. And Army don't do a lot of face-to-face counselling in their psychology. It's all about, institutional psychology, about testing and those kinds of things. And where we do send people off for clinical counselling, it's to civvies. Same as social workers. Our social workers are civvies. You've heard that term before, haven't you? And military people learn very quickly that the world is divided up into two classes of people. There's us and there's the civvies. And so there's a real us-them. Chaplains are not civvies. They're part of us. Chaplains wear the uniform. They do initial training with the people they serve. They get deployed with. They share all the life experiences of the military serving personnel. They actually live in units with the military personnel. So that when someone wants to go see the chaplain, they don't have to pick up a phone and make an appointment like they might have to do with medical or psychology or with a DCO social worker. They just drop by the chaplain's office, knock on the door and say, "Hey, sir, you've got a few moments for a chat." And if he's not there, they'll drop back again and again until they find the padre. Or they see the padre, having a cup of coffee at the local cafe. They can wander up and say g'day. They know the person because they're in the unit with them. Now, it's completely unlike any other support service. Those other support services, as I say, are some distance away, so the member has to leave their unit and go and seek help. And I've got to say, the fact that they're not seen as part of the team, those other services, the fact that with medical and psychological, it can also have a pretty profound impact on your career if you divulge something that might end up on your medical file or it might end up on your psych file. And in 2 or 3 years' time, when you're being considered for a course or some sort of special program or some sort of posting, and they see this on your psych file, that might be just the thing that stops you from getting it. So Defence members are really concerned about going to see psychology. They're concerned about divulging stuff medically because it might have an impact on their career. And I've got to say, psych and medical are also going, hang on a second, if it's a little thing, let's deal with it while it's small. And why not just get your pastoral care worker to do it and then it's done and dusted. If it's more important, then it gets referred on and dealt with appropriately. That makes sense. So you can see there's no comparison. They're not comparing apples with apples when we're talking about chaplaincy and those other support services. Chaplaincy is a unique beast. And as I say, it is almost exclusively a religious capability and almost exclusively a Christian religious capability. Now, we've tried pushing this over the last couple of years. Navy, as I say, were very successful in achieving reform. And as I reflect on why Navy was successful, it was successful because we had a then Deputy Chief of Navy, Mick Noonan, who rapidly became the Chief of Navy, who saw the need for reform. I went for a cup of coffee with him, or a cup of tea and a biscuit, I thought, into his office and sat down, and I didn't get a cup of tea or a biscuit, I got a dressing down. This is brand new, DG chap, Collin Acton, going over for a chat with my boss, and I got a dressing down. He said, "I'm not happy with the chaplaincy capability. You need to modernise it and get it on track, otherwise I'll get rid of it." And look, he didn't realise it at the time, but that was music to my ears. Like I say, after my sojourn, because I did that course in 2016, this is the beginning of 2017, I said, hallelujah, there is a God after all. Thank you, Mick. And so he provided the top cover for change to occur. And I've got to say, it wasn't just me. There was a whole group of people within Navy. Navy has a little tiny cell, so we got the whole capability in some sort of shape where we could take it to a Defence Force remuneration tribunal so we could pay them, because chaplains wouldn't let us use their pay structure. We had to have another pay structure. And there was a problem because Navy have a very small team, a whole court book needed to be written, and one of the 3 people who worked in that cell came in over the Christmas break and wrote the court book. So that shows you some level of commitment by Navy people to making sure that we had a secular, non-religious pastoral care option. And Mick Noonan's leadership and Mike Hammond, who's the current Chief of Navy, their leadership has shown that it can be done. There were lots of concern, I think, in the other services about what Mr Morrison and all the other politicians across the lake, they're always looking over their shoulders, trying to second guess what the politicians might say, because they're relying on those politicians to endorse them for their next step up the rung. But Mick Noonan and Mark Hammond They were just looking after their people. And unfortunately, Army and Air Force lacked that kind of leadership. The other thing I want to say is that Religious Advisory Committee to the Services, that's a committee that wrote some scurrilous accusations about me and my motivation to the Chief of Defence Force. I became aware of this only after an investigation had been conducted by the Deputy Chief of Navy, and Chris called me over and said, "Col, this investigation's happened. There's a letter. I can't show you the letter. I've tried to FOI the letter. Defence won't release it." But it made these pretty horrific allegations about my motivation for bringing in a non-religious chaplaincy support. And Chris said, "No case to answer. You're good, but you know something, mate? You're going to have to resign if you want to keep pressing for change." And so after 34 years of service in the Navy, I was left with no choice but to resign my commission. Now, I've spoken at length to people. It is a shame. Yep, and I've spoken to the current Minister for Defence Personnel's Chief Advisor on military matters, and I've said I really want an apology from Defence, and I want an apology from RACS, because that group of people are responsible for pushing me out of the Navy, and I find that absolutely awful. Look, the bell's gone. I was going to go on and tell a few other stories about RACS, but you can read that in the Rationalists, you know, the Anglican bishop calling his chaplains missionaries to the Defence Force, or the Pentecostal guy talking about how it's about evangelism and about bringing other sheep, or the Presbyterian guy talking about how non-religious people can't make ethical decisions. These are the people providing advice to Defence on religious matters. It is appalling. And the other thing I said, that committee needs to be reformed. When I had a chat to his advisor, apparently he's going to catch up and have a chat. Probably won't now that he's seen this video, but there we go. Yeah, anyway, we'll see how that runs. But just to say, on a positive note, I think change is possible. Navy's shown that it can be. Everyone was afraid that if we made a change, we would upset the churches. We made the change, there wasn't a whimper out of the churches. Defence can make the change, and the churches will just suck it up. The other really good thing and good bit of news to come out, yesterday, the British, the MOD, the UK MOD announced that they're employing their first 3 non-religious pastoral care workers in the Army, the Navy and the Air Force in the UK military. So pretty quickly, the Army and the Air Force in Australia will be outliers. So look, thank you very much for your attention. I look forward to the forum afterwards.